Today we're looking at a paper that basically claims the last few years of generative AI architecture might have been solving the wrong problem. We're talking about one-step latent-free image generation with pixel mean flows.
This is coming from MIT and CMU, and you've got Kaming here as the co-author.
Yeah.
I mean, when the creator of ResNet drops a new architecture, people pay attention.
The headline here is just so aggressive. They're proposing something called pixel mean flow, or PMF, and the claim, high-quality image generation in a single step one function evaluation directly in pixel space.
No latent representations, no VAEs. It's just pure noise to pixels.
Which is kind of the holy grail, right?
It really is. The core mechanism is separating the prediction space from the loss space. The network, it predicts the denoised image, we can call it Zegeller's, but the loss is calculated over in velocity space, $5.
And the results are they're wild. They hit an FID of 2.22 on ImageNet 256 by 256.
Which is competitive with the best multi-step latent-based models out there.
It proves that this idea of end-to-end generative modeling generating pixels without these complex pipelines or compression is finally viable.
Exactly. It completely challenges the assumption that you need latent spaces or, 50 sampling steps to handle high-resolution generation.
Welcome to AI Paper Podcasts. I'm your host, and with me is our expert analyst. We just threw a lot of heavy terminology out there, PMF, FID, latent-free. But let's take a breath and really look at the landscape here. Why is this specific combination, one-step and latent-free, such a massive deal right now?
Well, to really get the excitement, you have to look at the two giant crutches that modern image generation relies on. I mean, you look at the current state-of-the-art Stable Diffusion, Flux, Midjourney. They're amazing, but they're built on compromises.
Okay, let's list them. What's compromise number one?
The first one is time, or more specifically, multi-step sampling. Your standard diffusion models work by solving a differential equation, an ODE or an SDE. They take noise and they just iteratively refine it into an image. It looks great, but it's slow.
Right, that's the sampling step slider we're all familiar with. You set it to 20, 50, maybe 100 steps. You're basically paying for quality with time.
Precisely. And the second crutch is the latent space. Because generating millions of pixels from scratch was, for a long time, considered just too computationally expensive or too hard to model. So models like Stable Diffusion, they don't actually generate pixels. They generate a compressed abstract representation, a latent.
It's like a sandwich, right? You compress the image into this small latent, do all the hard generative work in that tiny space, and then you use a whole separate model of VAE to decode it back to pixels.
Correct. And this paper, PMF, is trying to throw out both of those crutches at the same time. It wants to do the generation in one single step, and it wants to do it directly in raw pixels.
Which, I mean, it sounds amazing for efficiency, but I imagine it's just incredibly difficult from a math perspective. We've seen things like consistency models help with the one-step part, and then you have like just image transformers helping with the pixel space part. But merging them...
That is the friction point. Merging them asks a tremendous amount of the neural network. You're asking one single model to handle the trajectory modeling, getting from random noise to a coherent image in one massive leap, while at the same time handling all the fine-grained texture generation that a VAE normally handles. You're taking away the tokenizer, you're taking away the compression that usually makes the problem so much simpler.
So the network has to be the artist and the compression algorithm all at once. Okay, let's unpack the theory. How do they actually pull this off? The paper leans pretty heavily on something called the Manifold Hypothesis. Break that down for us.
This is the theoretical bedrock. The Manifold Hypothesis suggests that real, clean images, a picture of a cat, a car, they lie on a very, very low-dimensional manifold inside this massive space of all possible pixel combinations.
Okay, in lay terms, if I just randomize pixels on a 4K screen, 99.999% of the time I'm just going to get TV static. A picture of a cat is a very rare structured thing.
Exactly. Clean images are these rare little islands in a giant sea of noise. Now, typically, flow matching models try to predict the velocity field. They're trying to predict the direction the noise needs to move to become an image.
Like a wind map that tells the noise where to blow to form a picture.
Yes, but in a high-dimensional space like raw pixels, that wind map, that velocity field, it's incredibly messy. It's high-dimensional and chaotic because it's describing the transition between noise and data.
So predicting the velocity directly is the trap.
It is in pixel space, yeah. If you try to predict the average velocity, let's call it duo 2, The network just really struggles because dual is everywhere. It doesn't sit on that nice, neat, low-dimensional manifold of clean images. It's defined over the entire noisy space.
So what does PMF do instead? This is that prediction versus loss distinction, right?
Right, they just flip the problem on its head. Instead of asking the network to output the velocity, they ask it to output 6.4, the denoised image itself.
Wait, so the network just guesses the final image in one shot?
Conceptually, yes. And since $6 represents a clean image, it lives on that low-dimensional manifold we just talked about, it's a much easier target for the network to learn because it has structure. It looks like something. The network knows what a cat or a car looks like.
But hang on, if the network is predicting the image, how do we train the flow matching part? Don't we need to know the velocity to solve the differential equation and, update the weights?
That is the clever part. They separate the prediction space from the loss space. The network predicts $6, the image. Then they use a mathematical formula to convert that predicted $6 back into the average velocity dollar, and then convert that into the instantaneous velocity dollar to calculate the loss.
So the network thinks it's painting a picture, but the math under the hood translates that painting into a velocity vector to grade it.
That's a perfect way to put it. You're grading the model on the physics of the flow, but you're letting the model express itself in the language it understands. Pixels.
Why does that distinction matter so much, though? Is it just a math trick, or does it actually change the learning dynamics?
Oh, it's much more than a trick. It's all about stability. The paper has this great visualization with a Swiss roll toy experiment. So imagine a 2D data set that looks like a spiral. When they tried to predict the velocity order directly, as they increased the dimensions of the ambient space, the model just completely failed. It was just noise.
It couldn't find the direction because the space was just too big and confusing.
Right. The vector field was way too complex. But when they switched to predicting the data point succination on the spiral, the model stayed stable even in very high dimensions. Predicting the destination is just fundamentally easier than predicting the complex vector field required to get there.
I see. It's like navigating a maze. It's way harder to memorize every single turn left, turn right instruction, that's the velocity, than it is to just know the exit is at these coordinates, that's the data.
Precisely. And in pixel space, the maze is millions of dimensions deep. So pointing at the exit is a much safer bet.
Okay, let's get into the gears of this thing. The algorithm itself. They mentioned something called improved MeanFlow, or IMF. How does that training loop actually look?
It's surprisingly elegant, actually. You take a noisy sample, the GSD, you feed it into the network outputs 6vol, the pixel image. Then you calculate the average velocity dollars by just taking the difference between the noisy sample and the predicted image and dividing by time, $2.
Simple algebra. It's just start minus end over time.
Then comes the gradient part. They use this IMF formulation, which involves a Jacobian vector product, a JVP, to match the time derivative. I won't bore you with the calculus, but essentially it just ensures the one-step trajectory is mathematically sound. But there is a second component to the training that's arguably more important for the actual visual quality we all care about.
You're talking about the perceptual loss?
Yes, LPIPS.
And this is interesting because usually in latent diffusion, you can't really use perceptual loss during the main generation training, can you?
Exactly. In a latent diffusion model, the generator is outputting latents, these compressed, nonsense matrices. You can't compare a latent matrix to a JPEG of a dog and ask, does this look like a dog? You need the decoder for that, and the decoder is trained separately.
But here, because PMF is spitting out raw pixels,
they can apply LPIPS, which basically mimics how human eyes perceive quality, directly to the training objective. It's what you see is what you get training. If the model generates a blurry texture, the LPIPS loss just spikes immediately.
And did it make a difference in the numbers?
A massive one. In their ablation study, just adding LPIPS improved their FID score, and lower is better here, from a 9.56 all the way down to 5.62.
Wow, that's almost a 50% improvement just from adding a loss function.
And then when they swapped the standard VGG-based loss for a Convex V2 variant, it dropped even further to 3.53. It seems that being in pixel space, which was supposed to be the hard part, actually gave them this huge advantage of direct supervision.
It lets the model focus on texture and structure in a way that latent models might gloss over until the very last decoding stage. I also noticed they swapped out the optimizer. I mean, usually everyone just uses Atom or AtomW. It's like the default setting in PyTorch. But they used Muon.
Yes, the momentum orthogonalized optimizer. It's a fascinating choice. They found that for this specific task of one-step pixel generation, Muon converged significantly faster and reached a better final FID. We're talking 8.71 compared to 11.86 for Atom at the same epoch count.
Why do you think Muon works better here? Is it something about the, I don't know, the geometry of pixel space?
It likely has to do with how orthogonalization handles the scaling of updates across different layers. In these massive transformers generating raw pixels, the variance in the gradients can be just wild. The energy of the noise is different from the energy of the signal. Muon seems to keep the learning trajectory more stable, which lets them push the training harder without it all collapsing.
It's so interesting to see the hardware and the optimizer choices evolving right alongside the architecture. It's not just about stacking more layers anymore. You have to tune the engine oil, too.
No, it's the whole stack. And speaking of the stack, we have to talk about time sampling. They sample $2 and a reference time $2.
This was a bit technical in the paper. They said that restricting sampling to just $2 or $2 fails completely.
Right. Some of the previous methods, like consistency models, they effectively focus on $2. That's the endpoint. Flow matching tends to focus on 2 Cowler, the current path. This paper argues that you need the full triangular domain, where $0 LUOET.
So why the triangle? What does that give you?
It's because you need to learn the relationships across the entire time horizon to get a robust field. If you only look at the start or the end, you create these blind spots in the trajectory. If you restrict it, the model collapses. You need the full history to learn that one-step jump properly.
So, robust theory, smart loss functions, new optimizer. Let's talk results. They tested this on ImageNet. How did it do against the heavy hitters?
On ImageNet 256 by 256, they hit an FID of 2.22. To put that in perspective, that beats StyleGAN-XL, which sits at 2.30.
And StyleGAN-XL was basically the king of one-step generation for a long, long time.
It was the undisputed king. But StyleGAN is a convnet. PMF is a transformer. This is a significant moment. It's proving that transformers can actually beat convnets at their own game-generating raw pixels efficiently, and without all the adversarial instability of GAMs.
And what about resolution? Usually pixel space models just fall apart when you double the pixels because the sequence length gets too long for the transformer. Attention is quadratic, right? It just gets expensive fast.
That is usually the killer. But this is where the engineering really shines. For ImageNet 512 by 512, they achieved an FID of 2.48. But they did it using what they call aggressive patchification. They used a patch size of 32.
Explain that for the listeners. What does changing the patch size do to the compute budget?
So a vision transformer breaks an image into little squares, or patches. Usually you might use 16 by 16 patches. If you go from a 256 image to a 512 image, you have 4 times as many pixels. If you keep those patches small, you get 4 times as many patches. That quadruples your sequence length, and your compute costs just explode.
Right, because the attention matrix gets huge.
Exactly. But by increasing the patch size to 32, they kept the number of patches, the sequence length, exactly the same as the 256 model. It sold just 162 tokens.
So the brain of the model, the transformer, is doing the same amount of work. It's just dealing with larger chunks of the image at a time.
Exactly. It makes the model highly FLOP efficient. They even scaled it up to 124 by 124 using the patch size of 64. And the fidelity holds up remarkably well.
This brings us to a really interesting comparison they made in the paper about the hidden cost of latent models. We always assume latent models are faster because they work in this compressed space. Is that still true?
It was true when generation took 50 steps. But when generation becomes 1 step, the entire equation just flips completely. Well, think about the pipeline. If you have a latent diffusion model, you generate the latent in 1 step super fast. But then you still have to run the VAE decoder to turn that latent into pixels.
And that decoder is a heavy convnet. It's not free.
It is massive. The paper points out that a standard stable diffusion VAE decoder takes about 310 G-flops just to decode a 256 by 256 image.
310 G-flops just for the decode step.
Just to decode. Now, compare that to the PMF generator. The entire huge model, the PMF H16, takes about 271 G-flops to generate the entire image from scratch.
Wow. Wait, let me get this straight. The shortcut of using a latent space is now actually more expensive than just doing the whole job in pixel space.
Once you get down to 1 step, yes, the VAE has become the bottleneck. We spent all these years optimizing the generative process, compressing images to save compute. But now that we can generate in 1 step, the decompression is the most expensive part. PMF just eliminates that overhead entirely.
That is a fascinating turning point. It's like we built a faster engine but kept the heavy old transmission, and now we realize direct drive is just more efficient.
That's a great way to put it. And it scales. They show that as you increase model size from base to large to huge and you increase training epochs, the FID just consistently drops. It behaves like a modern scaling law.
So what does this all mean for the field? We have a model that finally fills that 1 step plus latent-free gap. Is this the death of the VAE?
I think it really challenges the dogma that VAEs are necessary for high-resolution generation. For so long, we just assumed pixels were too correlated and too redundant to model directly. PMF shows that if you frame the problem correctly, predicting the manifold, $6 instead of the noise transformers can handle it just fine.
It feels like a huge simplification of the whole stack.
It is. It brings deep learning back to its roots, End-to-end optimization, no separate stages, no training of VAE first, no solving subproblems. You feed in noise, you get out pixels. It is one network pass.
It's just elegant, but I have to ask, if we are generating 124 pixel images in a single forward pass, essentially instantly, are we even doing generative modeling anymore? Or are we just building a neural rendering engine?
That connects to the bigger picture. If the computational cost is low enough and the speed is instant, the distinction really blurs. But here is the provocative thought I've been mulling over since I read this.
Let's hear it.
If the VAE decoder was the bottleneck all along, and that's something we didn't even notice until generation became instant part, what other optimizations are we all clinging to that are actually holding us back now?
Like what, for example?
Think about it. We use tokenizers for text. We use compression for video. We do all of this pre-processing to make data palatable for neural nets. But it's all based on hardware constraints from, say, 2020 or 2022. If compute has caught up to the point where raw data is learnable, maybe the next big breakthrough isn't a better compression algorithm. Maybe it's removing compression entirely from every modality.
That is a heavy thought. The idea that our efficient shortcuts might actually just be legacy code that's slowing us down. We're optimizing for constraints that might not even exist anymore.
Exactly. We might be running perfectly optimized code for a machine we no longer use.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into pixel MeanFlow. It's a dense paper, but the implication is simple. The future of generation might be a lot simpler and a lot more direct than we thought.
And a lot faster.
And faster. Always faster. Thank you for walking us through this.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. If you want to see that Swiss roll visualization we talked about, the link to the paper is in the notes. It really does help the math click. We'll catch you on the next one.